Now, Fox News alert, and the convicted terrorist known to the world as the Unabomber is dead. He was found unresponsive in his prison cell this morning at the age of 81. Ted Kaczynski sent deadly handmade bombs by mail, targeting scientists he believed were destroying nature. He spent 17 years on the run before his dramatic 1996 arrest in a primitive cabin in rural Montana where he was living. Good evening. I'm John Scott, and this is the Fox Report. The death of the Unabomber, our lead story tonight. Charles Watson is live in Atlanta with the latest. Charles.
Yeah, hey, good evening, John. Theodore Kaczynski, the man who the FBI infamously branded as the Unabomber, has died in federal custody in North Carolina. That, according to a spokesperson for the Federal Bureau of Prisons. We're told Kaczynski, who was 81 years old, was found inside of his cell at the Federal Medical Center in Butner, North Carolina, where he was housed. The Federal Bureau of Prisons telling Fox News in a statement, quote, responding staff immediately initiated life-saving measures. Staff requested emergency medical services and life-saving efforts continued. Mr. Kaczynski was transported by EMS to a local hospital and subsequently pronounced deceased by hospital personnel. Now, up until 2021, John, Kaczynski was held in a supermax prison in Colorado for his role in a 17-year terror campaign targeting scientists at colleges and universities across the country, including Northwestern University in Illinois, where his first device exploded. Kaczynski, who later admitted to committing 16 bombings, would eventually kill at least 3 people and injure dozens more victims. For years, investigators struggled to catch up with him until the fall of 1995, when the FBI allowed a 35,000-word essay sent by Kaczynski explaining his motive and views on society to be published for the world to read. After the manifesto appeared in newspapers, thousands of people suggested suspects, including Kaczynski's brother David, who described Kaczynski as someone who grew up in Chicago, taught at Berkeley, where 2 bombs had previously been placed, and had eventually settled in a small cabin in a remote part of Montana. What became most important for investigators to crack the case wide open were letters also provided by Kaczynski's brother, which allowed linguistic analysts to determine that those letters were from the same person who wrote the Unabomber's published manifesto. Finally, in April of 1996, federal investigators arrested Kaczynski, and after searching his cabin, found bomb materials, thousands of handwritten journals, and at least 1 bomb that was ready to be mailed out. He was given 4 life sentences in federal prison, where his reign of terror officially ended. John.
What a sweeping story. Charles Watson from Atlanta. Charles, thank you. A federal indictment is not stopping Donald Trump's bid for the White House. 24 hours after he was indicted for mishandling classified documents and other charges, he was speaking to voters in Georgia, slamming the charges to the crowd. Trump promised to fight the, quote, corrupt political establishment. And tonight, the former president heads to North Carolina to continue his presidential campaign. That's where Alexis McAdams is live now with the latest. Alexis.
Hey, John, good evening. Yeah, we are waiting for the former president of the United States, Donald Trump, to show up here in Greensboro, North Carolina for the GOP convention. You can check it out over my shoulder and see the room is filling up because these people want to hear what the former president has to say about indictment number 2. We had that preview a short time ago when he got on stage in Georgia for the first time publicly speaking, slamming not just the DOJ, but the FBI. Listen.
Only Donald Trump is indicted and they take 1 charge and they turn it into 36 charges. If you look at Hillary Clinton, set up an illegal private server in her basement specifically to break public disclosure laws, and that would expose her and her family's finances. She stored vast quantities of classified and sensitive information.
So there's a little bit there, John. But the former president continued to say that the indictment is horrible for the country, but great for his election campaign, pointing out that it's really only driven up his poll numbers.
Biden is trying to jail his leading political opponent, an opponent that's beating him by a lot in the polls.
Now, a few hours earlier, Trump's former running mate spoke at the North Carolina GOP convention, where I am right now in Greensboro. Vice President Mike Pence called on Attorney General Merrick Garland to stop hiding behind the special counsel. He didn't have all glowing reviews to say about his former boss, but he does not like the indictment. Take a listen.
I had hoped the Department of Justice would see its way clear to resolve the issues involving the former president without an indictment, and I'm deeply troubled to see this indictment move forward. Its capacity to further divide our country.
Now, this room is expected to be quite crowded, John. Like I mentioned before, the GOP people that we talked to here at this convention say they had so many people trying to buy tickets and then trying to buy even more once Trump was indicted, because they want to hear this fiery speech. You can check it out on my shoulder and kind of see the setup there. But this is rather the only event in the country that had Ron DeSantis, Donald Trump, and Mike Pence all speaking. So a lot of action here in a packed 24 hours. We'll send it back to you.
It's going to be interesting. Alexis McAdams in North Carolina. Thank you. President Biden is in Washington this weekend, refusing to comment thus far on the Trump indictment. Meanwhile, House Republicans are pressing the FBI to publicly release a whistleblower document they say shows that he accepted a bribe while he was vice president. A source familiar with that document has told Fox News it does not show that Biden himself received any payments. Lucas Tomlinson is live at the White House with the latest on that. Lucas.
And John, a Republican member of the House Oversight Committee, says she's reviewed that document and says the alleged bribe is much bigger than has been previously reported.
It was very credible and legitimate. I would not brush it off like the FBI has. And it corroborates other information that we've seen in other places, because the document, for one example, talks about not just $5 million, but $10 million going to the Biden family, half of that going to Hunter Biden, the other half going to Joe Biden.
And President Biden also traveling to North Carolina to tout what he called the administration's historic economic recovery. Biden also visiting the recently renamed Fort Liberty, formerly known as Fort Bragg, until earlier this month. Home, of course, the 82nd Airborne Division and Joint Special Operations Command. While in the Tar Heel state, the president did not want to talk about that second Trump indictment.
Mr. President, are you concerned about the vision in light of the Trump indictment? If everybody
President Biden, have you spoken to Attorney General Merrick Garland yet?
I have not spoken to him at all. I'm not going to speak to him. No comment on what happened.
And moving overseas, John, today the White House appeared to backtrack on a story about China building a spy base in Cuba. A White House official now telling Fox it's been there for years. Quote, China conducted an upgrade of its intelligence collection facilities in Cuba in 2019. This is well documented in the intelligence record. This is an issue that this administration inherited. And of course, the U.S. has been in Cuba for years. And John, 125 years ago today, U.S. Marines first captured Guantanamo Bay. And of course, the U.S. military has been there ever since. John.
Lucas Tomlinson, live from the White House. Lucas, thanks. Americans are weighing in on how they view the latest indictment of Donald Trump and new developments in the Biden probe. A Fox News poll shows 44% say they believe Joe Biden is corrupt. 55% think Donald Trump is corrupt. Let's bring in Saul Weisenberg, former deputy independent counsel and Fox News contributor. Saul, it's interesting, I guess, timing-wise, this allegation, this whistleblower complaint that suggests Joe Biden as vice president received a significant bribe from the Ukrainians. Nobody's talking about that right now. What is dominating the media headlines is the indictment of Donald Trump. Why?
Well, I think I don't think that the Trump indictment was timed to bury the story about the confidential informant, but I do think it's a byproduct of that story. I think that the Trump indictment was timed the way it was to affect the 2024 election, and I think it's unfortunate that happened.
So the committee, for instance, in Congress that is investigating the weaponization of government, you suggest that this would be the fodder for that kind of investigation?
Well, they certainly want to do, the administration wants to do everything possible, and there are many allies in the mainstream media to deflect away from this investigation. which I think has been very effective. And I think the information developed about the payments to the Bidens through all of the LLCs has been very damaging. But I think there were broader goals in mind with respect to the Trump indictment. And the real story there, the DOJ indictment, is all of the people on the Democratic side over the years who've had similar issues and have not been charged. And I think the allegation of a two-tiered system of justice is a very valid one.
Yeah, when Barack Obama was president, he appointed Vice President Joe Biden to be his point man for Ukraine. And lo and behold, all of a sudden, Hunter Biden gets this multi-million-dollar contract on the board of Burisma, the Ukrainian energy company. But Joe Biden says he never spoke to his son about his business affairs.
Well, we know that that's not accurate. We know that now. They did speak to each other about it. We don't know in what depth they spoke, but it's certainly an amazing fact that just after he's named, Vice President Biden is named the point man for this issue in the Ukraine, for all issues in the Ukraine, his son, who has absolutely no experience in energy, gets appointed to this board. It's the kind of thing that should have justified a special counsel to investigate Hunter Biden from the very beginning. And I think you can have an argument now there should be a special counsel investigating President Biden, not just over the documents that he had in an unauthorized manner for many years, but over the allegations about Ukraine. But don't hold your breath. It's not going to happen. And it's a long history of that. The failure to indict Hillary Clinton over the email scandal, there's a long list. The failure to indict Andrew McCabe when Michael Horowitz, the independent, the OIG head, who certainly is not known as trigger happy, referred him for a criminal indictment and said that he had lied repeatedly, including under oath. Nothing ever seems to happen to these people.
And Chris Wray, the FBI director, is being subpoenaed by a congressional committee and telling Congress he won't testify.
Yeah, well, they're still working on that. He has he has articulated no constitutional reason why he doesn't have to obey a congressional subpoena. There might be policy reasons for that. But there's no constitutional reason that he has articulated. And the problem is, in the past, people have deferred to the FBI because of respect for the FBI when they've said you're compromising sources and methods if we have to give you these documents. But people don't feel that way anymore because it's very clear that the FBI, at least at the leadership level, has been seen as politically compromised.
A two-tiered system of justice, you say. Saul Weisenberg. Saul, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, a congressional investigation will look into claims from a former intelligence specialist who says the government has retrieved partial and intact alien spacecraft, long called UFOs. Alexandria Hoff has that story.
This all came to light because whistleblower David Grush filed a complaint alleging retaliation for providing information to lawmakers about UFOs, or UAPs as they're now called. His biggest concern is that he feels Congress was kept in the dark. An assertion that was considered to be urgent and credible by the Intelligence Community Inspector General. That's according to Grush's former attorneys and reporting by The Debrief, which detailed claims by Grush that the government has been retrieving partially and fully intact non-human vehicles. He spoke out earlier this week.
When you say crash retrieval, what do you mean?
These are retrieving non-human origin technical vehicles, call it spacecraft if you will. It's probably not the right parlance, but no kidding, non-human, exotic origin vehicles that have either landed or crashed.
Grush is a former intelligence officer and served on the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force. Lawmakers say they're working to learn more.
If there are, there is evidence about UFOs, and it doesn't damage national security, I think we should be open to hearing it and telling the American people as much as we possibly can.
I don't have the answers at the moment. And when I do get the answers, I'll be honest, but I can't tell you because it'll still be classified. So, but we will definitely be looking for those answers.
Journalist Michael Schellenberger said that he's now had multiple credible high-level sources who have come forward claiming that the U.S. is in possession of at least a dozen non-human crafts. And he believes the government needs to open its doors.
So if they're not there, then nobody should object to people looking, including in unannounced visits. But you can't say that there's nothing there and we shouldn't look. I think that's no longer credible.
Well, a spokesperson for the Department of Defense told Fox News Digital this week that there is no verifiable information to substantiate these claims, John.
The truth is out there. Alexandria Hoff.
And it is in the South where emergency workers are coping with a massive flooding from that dam blast earlier this week. Disaster more and more seen as the work of the Russians. Stranded folks and pets are still being saved and helped with supplies as the shelling of evacuations continues by Russia. And Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau stopping here with a commitment of more support. That followed $2 billion of U.S. military aid committed on Friday. In a joint press conference here, President Zelensky also had a message for Vladimir Putin and his army. They do not have too much time left. Still, there is a lot of work to do and a lot of fighting to come. John.
Greg Palcott reporting. Greg, thank you. So as Prime Minister Trudeau remains overseas, wildfires continue to rage in Canada. The smoke from those wildfires impacting the United States. Take a look at New York City on Wednesday, where the air quality was considered the worst in the world. The haze over New York is easing now, but drifting into western and southern states. Some experts warn this wildfire season could be especially intense. So how did we get here? Assistant Professor of Geology, Environment and Sustainability at Hofstra University, Dr. Jace Bernhardt, joins me now. Dr. Bernhardt, you say that there's kind of an unusual combination of circumstances that led to this terrible air we're experiencing in the United States as a result of those Canadian fires.
Yes, and thank you for having me, John. What happened was we had some early season wildfires after a very dry May and early June in eastern Canada and Quebec, and a stubborn area of low pressure over Atlantic Canada caused very strong northerly winds to blow that smoke straight down to the northeast and mid-Atlantic U.S., causing the very, very poor air quality for a few days.
So what's the outlook? I mean, it's early for the fire season. It's only June at this point. What happens in July and August?
Yes, and that was one aspect of this. They were quite early, and that allowed the northerly wind to still be dominating. Usually we have more southerly flows again in the summer when wildfires are more common in Canada. And indeed, though, we are thinking that there still could continue to be dry and hot conditions into July especially. Looks fairly likely in the eastern U.S. and eastern Canada, so certainly more fires are possible. We just don't know if they will line up with those winds blowing the smoke straight down towards us in the U.S.
A lot of observers say that Canada could be doing more forest management, thinning out the underbrush, that would help prevent the scope of these fires. Any thoughts on that?
Wildfire practice is very, very complex, the management. Of course, if you suppress fires too much, a lot of fuel can build up, and then indeed you can have wildfires that end up being out of control. So sometimes it can be helpful to attempt to mitigate that by having smaller fires over time. But then sometimes the planned fires can get out of control, so it can certainly be tricky to manage that.
Yeah. Just unusual to have this much smoke as we saw in New York earlier. I mean, worst air quality in the world, as I mentioned. Is it likely to happen again? I mean, they're not going to get those fires out overnight.
Yes, it's highly unlikely in the sense that it takes the wind also blowing it straight down for multiple days, and it is rare to have that all line up for such a long period. Back in 2002 in July, we had a similar setup, but it just wasn't quite as intense of wildfires. The wind wasn't as strong, so the air quality wasn't quite as bad. But indeed, it's very uncommon to have this. And certainly it is possible that later in the summer, again, if the winds line up with the fires, that we could see some impacts from Canadian fires. Even occasionally fires out west, the smoke can cross the country and make it towards the northeast as well.
Yeah. Are those winds that are driving the smoke also the winds that are driving the fires?
Yes, that can certainly be part of it. There's been fairly strong winds, so indeed, when there's stronger winds, that can allow the fire to spread and unfortunately not burn itself out and just keep going. So once the fire starts, yes, if there's no precipitation, which they haven't seen, it can be very hard to take care of those.
Well, I know that our friends in Canada are asking for help to get all of those fires out. They've got a bunch of them. Do you see any relief anytime soon? I mean, just weather patterns wise?
Yeah, and certainly it's challenging being in such a remote area to get the personnel up there to fight the fires adequately, it would seem. And indeed, we're starting to shift towards a wetter pattern. There'll be some rain, it's definitely in the northeast U.S. By very late in the weekend, especially early next week. But it might take some time for the rain to make it all the way up to the portions of Canada where we're seeing the wildfires. But the good thing is the wind is going to slacken and not blow it our way anymore, at least for us in the U.S.
Well, let's hope they get some moisture. They need it. Dr. Jace Bernhardt, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
And Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg claims that early in the pandemic, the scientific establishment asked his platform to censor so-called misinformation posts about COVID-19. That turned out to be debatable or true. He told a podcast scientific experts waffling on coronavirus facts, quote, undermines trust. For more on these and other stories, download the Fox News app. You can scan the QR code on your screen or go to foxnews.com/apps.
I promise you, after years of budget cuts by the Biden administration, we will rebuild our military. We will give our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guard the support they need to accomplish their mission.
I think decline is a choice. It's a choice we as Americans will make over these next 18 months. And I'm running for president to reverse that decline and to put us on a path to American renewal.
With your vote, we will take back our country from these fascists and thugs, and we will absolutely make America great again.
Well, the 2024 Republican hopefuls are on the campaign trail talking tough to voters this weekend. Here's a look at the wide pool of declared GOP candidates. In about an hour, the frontrunner, former President Donald Trump, will take the podium at a campaign event in Greensboro, North Carolina. Will the first federal indictment ever against a former U.S. president hurt or somehow help his chances? Let's bring in Samantha Jo Roth, Washington Examiner reporter. The former president's been talking about that indictment today. He says, that it's only helped his polling and his fundraising numbers. Samantha Jo.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And it really remains to be seen with this latest indictment. It's certainly a lot different than the one that we saw in New York, that a lot of experts said was very weak. This indictment is significantly more large. It has a lot of evidence. So, it really remains to be seen on that point. However, this is Trump's race to lose. He is absolutely dominating all of the polls at this point in the race. And that is really just despite these legal troubles, despite some of these, real worries about electability in the general election.
Well, let's take a look at public attitudes toward the current occupant of the Oval Office. Those can't be considered good news for Joe Biden fans. Asked if he cares about people like me, only 45% said yes. Only 40% say he's honest and trustworthy, that 38% that he has the judgment to serve, 37% say he has the mental soundness to serve, is a strong leader. Only a third, 33% say he's strong, and 44% say he's corrupt. Now, you go to the same questions asked about Donald Trump, and well, Joe Biden loses in every category except the bottom two. 51% say Trump is a strong leader, and 55%, so more than Joe Biden, think that Donald Trump is corrupt. Not really good numbers for either candidate here, Samantha Jo.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is a problem that the American public is going to have to grapple with. A lot of folks really do not want to see a rematch between Biden and Trump. But that is looking to be like the most likely option. I will say it's very, very early in this process. We have 10 challengers, but none of them have really found a way to be able to take Trump on. And that is certainly something that they're going to need to be able to do in order to defeat him. He just has this hold over the Republican electorate at this point. And I will say also that the Trump team is very happy with how large this pool is. They know that this makes the math much more, it is able to get in his favor with this many other candidates. So that is certainly something that they are celebrating at this point. But, it is early in the process. We have lots of nominating conventions and primaries, so stay tuned.
Yeah, well, stay tuned for perhaps more Republican candidates. I mean, we had, 21, 22 back in 2016 running for the presidency on the Republican side. Would you expect there are others out there who are still going to get into the race? Chris Sununu being one who is talked about.
Well, I certainly would not expect that the field is going to look like it did in 2016. I think there was 17 candidates on the stage. If you remember, I was actually in Cleveland covering that one debate where there was 2 different rounds. Right. That was pretty remarkable. I don't think we're going to see anything like that this time around. But this is a remarkably very large field. And a lot of folks do believe that this benefits former President Trump. Obviously it brings a lot of the supporters over to him. And that is something that a lot of Republicans who do not support Trump have been worried about. And they tell me that.
It's going to be a wild, wild election. Samantha Jo Roth, thank you.
Thank you.
Accused of killing 4 University of Idaho students back in court yesterday as the family of one victim is challenging a gag order in the case that for now prevents them from speaking publicly about it. Brian Kohberger's attorneys want that gag order to stay, but the judge has not made a final decision. Jeff Paul is live with the latest. Jeff.
Yeah, John, beyond those involved in the case not being able to speak to journalists, once the trial starts, we might not be able to see what's happening inside the courtroom either. On Friday, the current gag order was challenged by a coalition of media organizations, as well as one of the victims' families, who say it violates constitutional free speech and the free press. But right now, attorneys, law enforcement, and even the victims' families cannot say a single word to the media. Brian Kohberger is accused of breaking in and stabbing to death 4 University of Idaho students inside their off-campus home last November. And since then, the case has clearly gained a lot of attention around the country. So the concern from the judge is maintaining a fair trial for Kohberger that isn't influenced by what's being said outside the courtroom.